He thought tonight would be another easy triumph, another roaring crowd bending beneath his charm. But before the final spotlight faded, Damian Cross was about to learn that humiliation has a way of circling back to the one who starts it. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The Grand Aurora Ballroom in downtown Chicago shimmered like a polished jewel beneath crystal chandeliers. Marble floors reflected rivers of golden light, and the city's most influential guests moved through the room in tailored tuxedos, designer gowns, and practiced smiles. Servers carried silver trays of sparkling water and champagne through clusters of donors, executives, and local celebrities who had come to attend the annual Hope Horizons charity gala. At the far end of the ballroom, a massive stage glowed beneath blue and gold lights, waiting for the evening's headline performer. Damian Cross had sold out arenas across America. His voice filled stadiums, his face covered magazines, and his name alone could turn a quiet fundraiser into front-page news. When he stepped backstage that night in a midnight black suit worth more than some people's monthly rent, heads turned automatically. Assistants rushed to meet his requests before he finished speaking. Event staff straightened their posture when he passed. He wore fame the way some men wore expensive cologne, thick enough for everyone nearby to notice. Damian paused near a mirrored wall while a stylist adjusted the collar of his jacket. He studied his own reflection with the casual confidence of a man who had spent years being admired. 500 people out there? He asked. Closer to 700. An event producer replied nervously. Damian smiled. Good. Let's give them something unforgettable. He said it lightly, but men like Damian rarely meant generosity when they used words like unforgettable. Across the backstage corridor, unnoticed by nearly everyone, Clara Bennett checked a microphone cable beside a stack of speakers. At 36, she moved with quiet efficiency, her dark blonde hair tied back neatly, her plain black work shirt pressed but inexpensive, her name badge clipped straight. She had worked events like this for nearly 3 years, arriving before sunrise, leaving after midnight, solving problems before anyone important had to notice them. She knew how to disappear in rooms built for attention. Mic 3 is still crackling, a stage manager called. I'm on it, Clara answered softly. Her voice was calm, warm, and strangely steady in the chaos. She crouched beside the soundboard, adjusted a connection, and listened through a headset. The interference vanished instantly. Fixed, she said. The manager nodded without looking at her. That was common. People thanked lighting designers, photographers, headline performers, even valet attendants more often than they thanked women like Clara. She never complained. Some silences are chosen. Damian entered the wings moments later, flanked by 2 assistants. He stopped when he heard a low humming sound drifting through the backstage hall. Clara, unaware anyone listened, was testing a monitor by softly matching a scale tone under her breath. It lasted only a few seconds, but the note was pure enough to make one nearby violinist glance up. Damian turned slowly. Who was that? He asked. Everyone froze. Clara looked over her shoulder. Just checking pitch levels, sir. Damian's eyes narrowed with amusement. You sing? Clara offered a polite half-smile. Not really. It was the kind of answer people give when truth feels too expensive to explain. Damian chuckled. Not really usually means yes, badly. A few assistants laughed because he did. Clara lowered her gaze and returned to the cables. Damian watched her another second, then smirked the way men do when an unkind idea begins to feel entertaining. Out beyond the curtain, the MC announced his name, and applause thundered through the ballroom like rolling weather. Damian straightened his cuffs. Stay close, he said to no one in particular, though his eyes remained on Clara. I may need a volunteer tonight. The room around him laughed again. Clara said nothing. She simply coiled the last cable in her hands and placed it neatly on the floor. Sometimes dignity says the least when arrogance is speaking the most. Then Damian stepped into the light, and the crowd rose to its feet. The applause rolled through the Grand Aurora Ballroom in warm waves as Damian Cross strode to center stage, smiling like a man who believed every room existed for his arrival. Cameras flashed from round tables draped in white linen. Guests lifted their phones high above crystal glasses and candlelight, eager to capture a moment they could post before dessert was served. Damien raised one hand, and the crowd quieted almost instantly. Power often reveals itself in how quickly strangers obey. "Chicago," he called, his voice smooth and practiced. "You look beautiful tonight." Cheers erupted again. He opened with his newest chart-topping single, moving easily beneath the lights while the band followed each cue with military precision. He knew exactly when to pause, when to grin, when to lower his voice so the audience leaned forward. Talent had helped build his career. Vanity had taken over the management of it. Backstage, Clara Bennett monitored levels through her headset, adjusting tiny controls as Damien's vocals bounced through the hall. She did not watch the screens for long. Her focus stayed on numbers, signals, timing, and the thousand invisible details that allowed stars to appear effortless. Near her, two younger staff members whispered excitedly about Damien's performance. "He is unreal," one said. "I would faint if he looked at me." Clara gave a small smile and continued working. She had seen enough famous people to know admiration can be loud, while character tends to speak softly. Damien finished the first song to a standing ovation from half the room. He accepted it as if applause were rent people owed him monthly. "You know what I love most about charity events?" he said once the room settled. "People come dressed up, acting polished, pretending they are classy for one night." Laughter scattered across the ballroom. Some guests laughed because it was funny. Others laughed because powerful people make honesty feel risky. Damien paced slowly across the stage. "But the real stars tonight are not just out here." He pointed toward the wings. "They are backstage. The people doing the hard work." A few polite claps followed. He nodded grandly, then tilted his head as though struck by inspiration. "In fact, let us thank one of them personally." Backstage, Clara looked up as a stagehand hurried toward her. "He is pointing this way," the young man said. "Probably wants a microphone swap." But Damien's fingers settled directly on her. "You," he said into the microphone, smiling wide enough for the crowd but cold enough for anyone nearby to understand. "The lady in black by the speakers. Come join me." Hundreds of heads turned at once. Clara froze for only a second. "Me?" she asked quietly. "Yes, you," Damien replied. "Come on. Everyone loves a surprise." The audience applauded, assuming generosity where mischief had already taken root. The stage manager leaned close to Clara. "Just go out there for a minute. Smile. He does this sometimes." Clara removed her headset carefully and placed it on the console. Her hands were steady, though her heartbeat was not. She walked toward the stage steps while whispers followed her path like loose paper in the wind. Under the bright lights, her simple uniform looked even plainer beside Damien's custom suit. He greeted her with exaggerated warmth and took her hand as if introducing royalty. "What is your name?" he asked. "Clara Bennett." "Let us hear it for Clara Bennett." The crowd applauded again. Clara nodded politely, eyes adjusting to the glare. Beyond the lights, the audience became a dark sea of faces and diamonds. Damien circled her once, playful and predatory at the same time. "So Clara," he said, "I heard a little rumor backstage." He leaned closer, microphone raised dramatically. "They tell me you sing." The room reacted with delighted murmurs. Clara answered carefully, "I only hum while I work sometimes." Damien laughed. "That is modesty, folks. Dangerous trait in show business." More laughter. He turned to the pianist. "Give us something simple." Then back to Clara. "How about a quick solo? Just for fun." Clara's expression remained calm, but a hush had begun to settle beneath the laughter. Some people recognized embarrassment before it fully arrived. "I am working tonight," Clara said gently. "I should get backstage." Damien threw a hand to his chest in mock heartbreak. "She is shy." He faced the crowd. "Should we encourage her?" Cheers answered him, louder than before. Clara stood still beneath 7,000 watts of stage light, while the man beside her mistook pressure for charm. And somewhere in the ballroom, the mood began to change. Damien Cross had mistaken the crowd's cheering for approval, but applause can hide discomfort the way bright lights hide cracks in a wall. He spread his arms and grinned toward the ballroom as if he had created a magical moment instead of an awkward one. "Come on now," he said, pacing around Clara Bennett with theatrical energy. "This is a celebration. We are raising money, lifting spirits, making memories. Give us one song." Laughter rippled through several tables near the front. Some guests smiled uncertainly. Others looked down at their plates. No one wanted to be the first person to admit something felt wrong. Clara stood beneath the spotlight with quiet composure, hands folded loosely in front of her. "Mr. Cross," she said softly, "I really should return to work." Damien leaned toward the audience and lowered his microphone as if sharing a joke with old friends. "Hear that? She called me Mr. Cross. That means she is serious." More laughter followed, thinner this time. He turned back to her. "Please. 30 seconds. We will all survive." Clara's eyes moved briefly across the room. 700 faces. Crystal chandeliers. Cameras lifted like curious birds. In the back row, a server paused with a tray in midair. Near the stage stairs, the event producer pressed a hand to her forehead. The night was slipping somewhere no schedule had planned for. Damien signaled the pianist again. "Give her something easy. Maybe Amazing Grace." "Everybody knows that one." The pianist hesitated. He had played with professionals long enough to recognize cruelty dressed as entertainment. Still, he touched the keys gently, and the familiar melody drifted through the ballroom. Clara did not move. "I appreciate the invitation," she said, voice calm and clear enough to carry without effort. "But I am not here as a performer tonight." Damien's smile stiffened. Men who live on admiration often struggle with the word no. "Not here as a performer," he repeated. Interesting answer. He circled once more, then faced the audience. "You know what I think? I think Clara is secretly incredible and too humble to admit it." He pointed toward her with playful accusation. "Am I right?" Some guests clapped weakly. Others remained silent. Clara felt the heat of the lights on her face and the weight of hundreds of strangers deciding who she was based on one uncomfortable minute. She had known that feeling before. It had followed her through auditions, boardrooms, waiting rooms, and years of ordinary jobs taken by extraordinary people trying to heal quietly. Damien stepped closer and lowered his voice, though the microphone still caught every word. "Do not worry. If it goes badly, I will save you." The sentence landed like polished arrogance. Clara looked at him then, fully, for the first time. Her expression did not harden. It steadied. "That is generous," she said. The room went strangely still. Something in her tone had changed. Damien sensed it but mistook it for surrender. "There we go," he announced brightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, Clara Bennett is going to sing." Cheers rose again, but now mixed with curiosity. Clara glanced toward the wings where the stage manager stood frozen. Then she looked to the pianist. "May I choose the key?" she asked. The pianist blinked in surprise. "Of course," he said. A few musicians exchanged quick glances. People who understand music know that simple questions can reveal hidden worlds. Damien chuckled. "Listen to that confidence. I love it." Clara stepped toward the piano bench, but remained standing beside it. "Could we stop for a moment?" she asked. Her voice was gentle, yet the pianist lifted his hands immediately. Silence spread across the ballroom like a curtain dropping. Even the waitstaff stopped moving. Clara took one slow breath. Somewhere deep in memory, another stage waited. Another spotlight. Another life she had buried beneath practical shoes and payroll schedules. She had walked away from that life 12 years earlier after hospital rooms, funeral flowers, and a grief too heavy for applause to carry. Since then, she had chosen small rooms, steady work, and the safety of being overlooked. Damien folded his arms, amused by the delay. "Nerves are normal," he said into the microphone. "Take your time." Clara turned toward him with a small, unreadable smile. "Thank you," she said. Then she faced the crowd again, shoulders relaxed, eyes clear. The ballroom held its breath without knowing why. And for the first time that night, Damien Cross was no longer the most important person standing under the lights. Clara Bennett placed one hand lightly on the piano as though greeting an old friend she had not expected to see again. The ballroom remained so quiet that the soft clink of silverware from a distant table sounded almost rude. Damien Cross stood a few feet away, smiling for the audience, but the confidence in that smile had begun to thin around the edges. He had wanted hesitation, embarrassment, a nervous laugh from a woman out of place. Instead, he was watching someone become steady. "Any time you are ready," he said, lifting his microphone with playful impatience. Clara turned to the pianist. "Do you know Autumn River?" she asked. The older musician blinked twice. It was not a radio hit or a crowd-pleasing standard. It was a demanding American classic known mostly to trained vocalists and serious musicians, rich with range, timing shifts, and emotional precision. Yes, he said slowly. I know it. Several members of the band straightened in their seats. One violinist looked from Clara to the pianist with sudden interest. Damien laughed lightly, hoping to reclaim the room. Bold choice, he said. Well then, let us hear Autumn River. Clara nodded once. Please begin in E-flat. The pianist stared at her for a brief second, then lowered his hands to the keys. He understood what most of the audience did not. People do not casually request difficult keys unless they know exactly where they are going. The first notes floated into the ballroom, warm and restrained, like the opening of a story too wise to rush. Clara closed her eyes for a single breath. When she opened them, the timid event technician everyone had ignored was gone. In her place stood a woman carrying years no one in the room had bothered to imagine. Then she sang. The first line was soft, low, and clear enough to seem impossible without a microphone. Conversations stopped mid-whisper. A server near table 9 froze beside a water pitcher. Damien's smile held for 1 second longer, then faltered. Clara's voice rose with effortless control, filling the high ceilings and crystal arches of the ballroom, not with volume, but with presence. It moved through the room the way candlelight moves through glass, steady and undeniable. She did not perform for applause. She told the truth through melody, and truth has a way of making noise feel embarrassed. Guests who had lifted phones for amusement slowly lowered them in stunned silence. The second verse climbed into a higher register that caused the violinist to glance sharply at the pianist. He was already smiling. Clara shaped every phrase with the discipline of someone who had spent years earning mastery long before life asked her to set it down. There was no strain, no showing off, no dramatic flourish for attention, only command. Damien took one step backward without realizing it. The crowd noticed before he did. At the front table, a woman in diamonds whispered, "Who is she?" No one answered. Across the ballroom, the event producer pressed both hands over her mouth. Clara reached the bridge of the song, where lesser singers often push too hard. Instead, she softened, turning the lyric intimate and human, and the effect was stronger than any shout could have been. Several guests felt tears rise without warning. Some voices entertain. Others remind people of things they forgot they needed. Damien's jaw tightened. He looked toward the band as if someone had arranged a trick behind his back. But no trick can teach breath control, phrasing, or grace under pressure. Clara had brought those with her long before he dragged her into the light. Then came the final note. It soared upward, pure and luminous, held with such calm precision that the room seemed to lean toward it. Even the chandeliers looked still. When she released it, silence followed. Not awkward silence. Reverent silence. The kind money cannot buy and fame cannot command. Clara lowered her chin and stepped back from the piano. She did not bow. She did not chase reaction. She simply stood there, breathing evenly. Damien Cross stared at her as if language had abandoned him. Then, from somewhere near the rear of the ballroom, one pair of hands began to clap. Another joined. Then another. In less than 3 seconds, 700 people rose to their feet. The standing ovation struck the ballroom like thunder delayed too long. Chairs scraped backward. Glasses trembled against white linen, and 700 people rose as one body to honor what they had just witnessed. Clara Bennett remained still beside the piano, one hand resting lightly against its polished edge, as if applause belonged to someone else. Some people chase recognition their whole lives. Others learn how to stand quietly when it finally arrives. Damien Cross did not clap. He stood frozen under the stage lights with his microphone lowered at his side, watching a room that had come to celebrate him now pour its admiration elsewhere. The cameras that had followed his every gesture moments earlier were now aimed entirely at Clara. Several guests wiped tears from their eyes. Others shouted for one more song. The pianist laughed softly to himself and shook his head in disbelief. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event MC said from the wings, voice trembling with excitement. "That was extraordinary." Damien turned sharply, forcing a smile that looked expensive but fragile. "Of course it was," he said into the microphone. "I knew she had something special." The words drifted into the room and fell flat. People can forgive arrogance more easily than dishonesty, but rarely both at once. Clara glanced at him without bitterness. That almost made it worse. From the front row, an elegant woman in her 60s suddenly stood, straighter, staring hard at Clara's face. Then recognition swept across her features like sunrise. She stepped away from her table before anyone could stop her and moved quickly toward the stage stairs. Guests parted for her without knowing why. The woman was Evelyn Hart, former chair of the Chicago Conservatory and one of the most respected vocal directors in the country. Even Damien noticed her approach and straightened instinctively. Evelyn climbed onto the stage, never taking her eyes off Clara. "It cannot be," she whispered. Then louder, into the silence that instantly followed, "Clara Monroe?" A murmur spread across the ballroom. Clara's expression softened with surprise. She had not heard that last name spoken publicly in years. "Hello, Miss Hart," she said quietly. Evelyn placed one hand over her heart. "My dear child," she turned to the audience. "Do you people understand who is standing in front of you?" No one answered. Damien's face tightened. Evelyn continued, voice clear and commanding. 12 years ago, Clara Monroe was the youngest vocalist ever accepted into the National Touring Opera Fellowship. Critics called her the finest emerging voice of her generation. Then she disappeared overnight before her debut season. Gasps rippled across the room. Phones rose again, this time not for gossip, but history. Clara lowered her eyes. Fame once lost its shine when measured against grief. Evelyn stepped closer. "Your mother became ill," she said gently. "You withdrew to care for her." Clara nodded. After she passed, singing no longer felt like home. The room went silent again, but this silence carried respect. Many in that ballroom had wealth. Few had sacrifice. Damien swallowed hard. He had invited a stranger on stage. Instead, he had exposed himself beside greatness. "I remember now," one donor whispered near the front. "There were articles. She was everywhere for a season. And then nowhere," another replied. Evelyn faced Damien at last. "You mocked a woman whose gift most professionals spend lifetimes trying to approach." Damien attempted a laugh. "Now hold on. I was just trying to create a fun moment for the crowd." No one joined him. The pianist looked away to hide a smile. Clara stepped forward before humiliation could turn cruel. "Miss Hart," she said warmly, "please. Tonight is for the charity." Even now, she was protecting the room from the damage someone else had caused. Evelyn nodded slowly, eyes bright with admiration. Still gracious. Still rare. She took Clara's hand and raised it high. The ballroom erupted once more. Damien stood beside them like a portrait no one wanted. Then a young reporter near the aisle called out, "Miss Bennett, will you sing professionally again?" Clara smiled with calm that no spotlight could improve. "Tonight," she said, "I was already doing meaningful work." The crowd cheered louder than before. And in that moment, Damien Cross learned a lesson no stage had ever taught him. Fame may command attention, but humility commands hearts. The applause lingered long after the last hand stopped moving, as if the ballroom itself was reluctant to let the moment end. Guests remained standing, smiling at Clara Bennett with the kind of admiration that cannot be scheduled into an evening program. Damien Cross, however, understood something new and uncomfortable. Attention can be stolen in seconds, but respect must be earned slowly, often painfully, and sometimes too late. The event MC hurried back onto the stage, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I believe our fundraiser just received the greatest surprise performance in its history." Laughter and cheers answered him. "And because miracles seem to be happening tonight, I am pleased to announce that donations have doubled in the last 10 minutes. The room erupted again. Several donors raised their paddles immediately, calling out new pledges of $50,000, $100,000, even $250,000. What months of planning had struggled to inspire, one honest voice had accomplished in minutes. Clara looked genuinely startled. "That is wonderful," she said softly. Evelyn Hart squeezed her hand. "No, my dear. You are wonderful." Damien stepped forward, determined not to disappear entirely from his own stage. "This is what tonight is about," he declared into the microphone. "Using our gifts to help others." His voice carried confidence, but the room no longer leaned toward it. Guests listened politely the way people listen to announcements in airports. He glanced at Clara. "Perhaps Clara and I could do a duet to close the evening." The offer was framed as generosity. Everyone heard desperation. Clara saved him from a harsher silence by smiling kindly. Thank you, but the children should remain the focus tonight. A few people laughed gently. Damien nodded stiffly. Even refusal sounded graceful when spoken by someone who did not need to win. The event producer approached the stage and whispered to the MC, who brightened instantly. We have another surprise, he announced. Hope Horizons would like to recognize one of our own staff members. Clara Bennett has worked nearly every fundraiser for the past 3 years, often staying after midnight to help dismantle equipment and organize supplies. She has never once asked for recognition. The producer handed Clara a small crystal plaque that had clearly not been prepared for this purpose. It did not matter. Some honors become meaningful only because they were unplanned. Clara accepted it with visible embarrassment. Thank you, she said. Everyone here works hard. She glanced toward the catering staff, lighting crew, janitors, and stagehands gathered near the rear wall. Please remember to thank the people whose names are not printed in the program. Heads turned toward the back of the room. For the first time all night, servers received applause. A janitor near the exit wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his uniform. Damien lowered his gaze. He had commanded arenas, yet somehow this quiet woman understood audiences better than he ever had. After the formal program ended, guests formed a line not for Damien, but for Clara. Some wanted photographs. Others wanted simply to shake her hand. A teenage girl from one donor family approached nervously with a music folder pressed to her chest. Miss Bennett, she said, I stopped singing last year because people said I was not good enough. Clara knelt slightly, so they stood eye to eye. Then sing Where Kindness Lives until your confidence returns, she said. Talent grows best there. The girl nodded through tears. Across the room, Damien watched alone beside a table of untouched desserts. No assistant could fix what had happened. No spotlight could restore what arrogance had dimmed. He approached Clara at last when the line thinned. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. It was the most honest sentence he had spoken all night. Clara met his eyes. Then give one to the next person you are tempted to underestimate, she replied. That would matter more. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Wisdom often leaves pride with nothing to say. Near midnight, the chandeliers began to dim. Staff folded chairs, rolled cables, and cleared glassware. Clara returned the borrowed stage microphone, slipped back into her headset, and helped stack speaker cases beside the loading dock. Several workers stared in disbelief. You are really going back to work? One asked. Clara smiled. The night is not over yet. And as the city lights shimmered beyond the ballroom windows, everyone who had witnessed that evening remembered something money, fame, and status often forget. The brightest voices are not always the loudest. Sometimes they belong to the people no one thought to notice. By 1 o'clock in the morning, the Grand Aurora Ballroom no longer looked like a palace of polished glamour. Half the candles had burned low, floral centerpieces were being boxed, and the echo of laughter had faded into the practical sounds of rolling carts and folding tables. Wealth always leaves quietly once the photographs are taken. Clara Bennett stood near the loading entrance, coiling microphone cables with the same care she had shown before the crowd knew her name. Her crystal plaque rested on a nearby crate beside a stack of extension cords. To most people, it would have seemed absurd that the woman who had just stunned 700 guests was now wrapping cords and labeling storage bins. But dignity rarely changes clothes just because attention arrives. You really do not have to do that, the event producer said as she approached, still carrying the nervous energy of the evening. We can finish from here. Clara smiled and tightened one final strap around a cable bundle. You have been on your feet for 14 hours, she said. So have I. Let us both finish. The producer laughed softly. I do not know anyone like you. That makes 2 of us, Clara replied. Across the room, several staff members who had barely spoken to her for months now hovered nearby, unsure how to act around someone newly admired. A young lighting technician finally stepped forward. Miss Bennett, he said, then corrected himself awkwardly. Clara, I just wanted to say, I never knew. Clara placed a labeled case onto a dolly. Most people do not know many things, she said kindly. That is why we should be careful how we treat them. He nodded as though handed advice worth more than his paycheck. Near the ballroom doors, Damien Cross remained in conversation with his manager. Their voices were low but tense. News clips were already spreading online. Guests had posted videos titled Unknown Staff Worker Outshines Headliner, and silent technician stuns Chicago Gala. Damien's manager looked at the glowing screen of his phone, then at Damien, then back again. Public opinion can turn faster than stage lights. Damien spotted Clara and hesitated before walking toward her. Gone was the swagger of earlier hours. Even his expensive suit seemed heavier now. "Clara," he said carefully. She turned, holding a roll of black tape in one hand. "Yes." He glanced around at the workers nearby, perhaps realizing apologies sound different when witnesses are ordinary people. "I meant what I said earlier. I was wrong." Clara studied him for a moment, not with anger, but with clarity. "About what part?" she asked. The question landed gently and cut deeply. Damien looked down. "About assuming I could use someone for a laugh. About thinking talent belonged only where I expected to find it." The room had gone quiet again. Even the janitorial crew slowed their sweeping. Truth attracts attention when spoken sincerely. Clara nodded once. "Then tonight was useful for both of us." He almost smiled. "Would you ever consider performing again? I know people. I could make calls." There it was, the old instinct to solve everything with access and influence. Clara set the tape down on the crate. "Damien, I stepped away from stages because life asked something different of me, not because doors were closed." He absorbed that slowly. Privilege often assumes every silence is exclusion. "I understand," he said, though he likely only understood part of it. Evelyn Hart entered from the hallway wearing a wool coat over her evening gown, elegant even at midnight. "I was hoping you had not left," she told Clara. "The conservatory board would like to speak with you. Teaching, guest performances, whatever role you wish. No pressure." Several staff members exchanged stunned looks. Offers like that did not appear in loading docks. Clara laughed softly. "You choose dramatic locations for business conversations." Evelyn glanced at the stacked chairs and mops. Great opportunities should know how to travel. Damien stepped aside, giving Clara space that he had denied her hours earlier. It was a small gesture, but growth often begins that way. Clara looked around the room at tired workers gathering linens, pushing bins, checking inventory. These were the people who made elegant nights possible and were forgotten by breakfast. "If I do anything with music again," she said, "I would like scholarships for backstage workers and their children included." Evelyn smiled instantly. "Done." The producer gasped. The janitor by the wall removed his cap in disbelief. Clara nodded. "Then I will listen." A hush fell across the loading area. In a room full of discarded decorations and tired feet, she had turned admiration into opportunity for others. Damien watched her with something unfamiliar in his eyes. It was not envy. It was respect, finally arriving late, but genuine. Outside, snow had begun to fall over downtown Chicago, quiet and bright beneath the streetlights. And inside that half-empty ballroom, everyone present learned that true greatness does not ask how high the spotlight shines. It asks who else can stand in it too. By the next morning, Chicago had already decided what the most memorable moment of the gala had been. It was not the celebrity entrance, not the luxury auction items, and not the headlines planned weeks in advance. It was a woman in a plain black work shirt standing beneath stage lights she never asked for and singing with the kind of grace that made everyone else seem overdressed. Video clips spread across phones, breakfast tables, office elevators, and commuter trains. Some were only 20 seconds long. Others captured the entire song and the standing ovation that followed. Millions of views arrived before noon. Fame often spends years building what truth can earn overnight. Clara Bennett woke at 6:30 in her modest apartment on the north side of the city. Snow still rested along the window ledge in soft white lines. Her kitchen was small, her coffee maker old, and the radiator made a knocking sound each winter morning. None of it bothered her. She fed the orange rescue cat who supervised breakfast from the counter, then opened her phone to 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and more notifications than she had received in the previous 5 years combined. She stared at the screen, sighed once, and set it face down beside her mug. Sudden attention is still noise before coffee. At Hope Horizons headquarters, staff members were already buzzing when Clara walked through the side entrance carrying a paper bag with 2 blueberry muffins to share. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Then the office erupted in cheers so loud someone in accounting dropped a stapler. Clara laughed despite herself. "Please do not make this strange," she said. "Too late." The receptionist replied, wiping tears from her eyes. You are trending in 3 countries. Clara placed one muffin on the front desk. Then eat this before it gets cold. Even now, she answered chaos with practical kindness. The executive director, Martin Hale, hurried from his office with a printed spreadsheet in hand. You need to see this, he said. Donations had poured in overnight from people who watched the clips online. $5, $20, $200, one anonymous gift for 100,000. Notes accompanied many of them. For Clara. For dignity. For every worker ignored in public. Martin's voice shook. This funds our youth arts program for 2 years. Clara looked down quietly. Then the song did its job. Across town, Damian Cross sat in a luxury hotel suite watching television segments replay the gala from angles he had not known existed. Commentators praised Clara's humility and talent while politely questioning his judgment. One entertainment host said, he tried to stage a joke and accidentally introduced the real star. Another called it a masterclass in how arrogance loses rooms. Damian muted the screen. His manager paced nearby with a tablet full of canceled interview requests and urgent brand calls. We need a response strategy, she said. Statement, charity donation, maybe a joint appearance if she agrees. Damian stared at the paused image of Clara helping stack chairs after the performance. No strategy, he said quietly. Not this time. He picked up his coat and left before she could answer. Near noon, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot behind Hope Horizons. Employees watched through blinds as Damian stepped out carrying no assistance, no sunglasses, no practiced grin. Only a garment bag and a cardboard tray of coffees from a neighborhood shop. He entered the office uncertainly, as though fame had never taught him how to walk into places where no one was impressed. Clara looked up from a conference table covered in grant forms. You found us. Damian set the coffees down. I asked 3 people for directions. None of them cared who I was. Clara almost smiled. Useful city. Staff members pretended to work while listening shamelessly. Damian placed the garment bag on the table. This is the suit from last night, he said. I am auctioning it online. Every dollar goes here. Clara raised an eyebrow. People will pay for your suit? Apparently people pay for many strange things. A few staff members laughed. The tension softened. Then Damian became serious. I also came to ask if I can volunteer. No cameras. No announcements. Whatever needs doing. The room went silent. Clara studied him carefully. Redemption sounds noble until it requests real labor. We have a storage room that needs organizing, she said. Boxes, dust, no spotlight. Damian nodded immediately. Perfect. Martin handed him a pair of work gloves. By 2 o'clock, one of the country's most recognized singers was sorting donated school supplies beside a dented metal shelf while Clara labeled bins nearby. No one took pictures. No one applauded. And strangely, Damian looked more at peace than he had on any stage. Sometimes the first honest performance of a person's life happens after the audience leaves. 3 months later, the spring sunlight poured through the tall windows of the newly renovated arts wing at Hope Horizons, warming fresh paint, polished wood floors, and rows of donated instruments waiting for young hands to discover them. Where an unused warehouse room had once stored broken desks and forgotten boxes, there now stood practice studios, a recital space, and a sign above the entrance that read the Clara Bennett Creative Center. Clara had protested the name for 2 weeks. The board approved it anyway. Sometimes gratitude refuses to stay modest. Children filled the hallway with violin squeaks, piano scales, laughter, and the beautiful noise of beginners who had not yet learned to fear mistakes. Clara moved from room to room in simple slacks and a navy sweater, helping one student count rhythm, showing another how to breathe before a phrase, reminding a shy boy that cracked notes are only bridges to stronger ones. She taught the way some people heal, gently, and without making anyone feel small. In the recital room, Evelyn Hart observed from the back row with shining eyes. You were always meant to lead, she said when Clara finally sat beside her during a short break. Clara smiled. I was meant to serve. This simply uses a different tool. Evelyn laughed softly. That sentence alone should be framed. Near the front desk, a stack of envelopes waited to be opened. Inside were scholarship applications from families across Illinois, many from children whose parents worked maintenance, housekeeping, food service, warehouse jobs, or overnight shifts. The requirement Clara insisted upon had become the heart of the program. Talent from unseen homes would no longer need permission to be noticed. Downstairs, someone was struggling with a cart of folding chairs. Clara recognized the voice before. She saw him. Damian Cross emerged from the elevator wearing jeans, work boots, and a plain gray sweatshirt with the center's logo printed across the chest. He had returned every Tuesday and Thursday since that day in the storage room. At first, staff expected cameras to appear. None ever did. He sorted supplies, painted walls, assembled music stands badly, then learned to assemble them less badly. Publicists had begged him to publicize the volunteer work. He refused. Redemption advertised too loudly can become another performance. "You are late by 4 minutes," Clara said. Damian checked his watch. Traffic. Excuses are the luxury version of apologies. He laughed. "You really do not miss chances, do you?" Not anymore. Their friendship had formed carefully, not from the gala but from ordinary tasks completed side by side. Respect grows sturdier in small, repeated moments than in dramatic speeches. Damian had also changed professionally. He canceled a planned vanity tour and instead launched a mentorship series for public school arts departments. Interviews became fewer, but better. He listened more. He interrupted less. Critics called it a rebrand. Those who knew him knew better. In the afternoon, the center hosted its first community recital. Parents packed the room shoulder to shoulder, phones ready, tissues already in hand. Children performed simple songs with trembling fingers and fierce concentration. Every applause sounded like encouragement instead of judgment. Backstage, a teenage girl adjusted her dress nervously. Clara recognized her immediately as the donor's daughter who had once said she stopped singing. "I cannot do this," the girl whispered. "Yes, you can," Clara said. "But you do not need to be perfect. You only need to be brave for 3 minutes." "What if they laugh?" Clara's expression grew calm. "Then they reveal themselves, not you." The girl nodded and walked onto the stage. She sang softly at first, then stronger by the chorus. When she finished, the room rose to its feet. Clara did not join the applause immediately. She simply watched with quiet satisfaction. Another voice had found its way back. After the final performance, Martin Hale stepped to the microphone. "Before we close," he said, "our center has one announcement. Beginning this fall, we are expanding to 2 more neighborhoods." Cheers filled the room. Thanks to donors, volunteers, and one unforgettable night that changed everything. Clara looked down, embarrassed by attention even now. Damian began clapping first. Others followed. Outside, evening settled over Chicago in bands of gold and blue. Families lingered on the sidewalk, children carrying sheet music like treasure. Through the windows, Clara could be seen stacking chairs with the last few volunteers. Some habits are signs of character, and everyone who knew the story understood a truth worth keeping. Never measure a person by the spotlight they stand in. Measure them by the light they leave behind.